Welcome to Blackstone Intelligence. I'm Jacques Morphonios. From approximately 1100 to 1300, the Knights Templars spread their power, their wealth, and their influence across Europe. Among their activities was the financing of beautiful churches, beautiful cathedrals, all throughout the continent. These structures were built by craft guilds. Now, what were these guilds? How did they get started? Let's go way back in time. Sacred geometry is the study of sacred truths as found in certain geometric proportions that are found not only in nature, but throughout the entire cosmos. The geometric patterns present in nature lend support to the creation of our physical reality by an intelligent designer. The ancients took their knowledge of sacred geometry and they passed it down through the ages, through the various mystery schools and mystic traditions. Along the way, this knowledge has been used, among other things, to create stunning architecture by people. It's believed that these geometric patterns are the physical manifestations of the invisible energy patterns that weave together to manifest what we know as reality. The ancient Egyptian texts and wall illustrations present an initiation process whereby men may become masters of these energy patterns, enabling them to do things that are perceived as magical. The Egyptians also believed that to die without this sacred knowledge would entrap the soul in a kind of spiritual net. But with the initiation into the mysteries and a subsequent mastery of this sacred knowledge, a soul would be able to navigate his way through the non-corporeal afterlife. The Egyptian god Thoth was said to be the master of this spiritual net, the net being a kind of energy space-time matrix that constituted the unseen spiritual world. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, known to the people of ancient Egypt as the Book of Coming Forth into the Light, describes this net in detail. The initiate is to consider himself as one with Osiris, the slain god who was brought back to life. And by going through the same spiritual process as Osiris, the initiate is able to navigate to higher and higher spiritual realms and conquer death itself. Now, these teachings of the Egyptian mystery schools, including the teachings about sacred geometry, eventually became part of the mystery schools of ancient Greece and later Israel. The ancient Greeks incorporated numerology and sacred geometry into their mystery schools and into their Gnostic texts. This included their teachings about the existence of the net, or this invisible energy field, and the need for mortals in the physical realm to align themselves with the realm of the spirit. Sacred geometry was most certainly used by the Greeks in their temple architecture. And like Israel, Greece had a numerical system that corresponded with their alphabet, a system known as gematria. It was believed that words and names produced certain vibrational qualities, kind of like a tuning fork, that corresponded to various types of energy and power. When the Greeks built a temple, for example, they translated the name of the god to whom the temple was going to be dedicated into its corresponding numerical or numerological values, and these numbers were used to design and measure that temple. In Israel, the knowledge of sacred geometry became incorporated with the teachings of Kabbalah. The most well-known representation of this teaching is called the Tree of Life. Part of these esoteric teachings place heavy emphasis on certain numbers, including the numbers 3, 7, and 12. The Bible is brimming with references to these numbers, such as the 3 member of the Godhead, or the 7 days of creation, and the 12 apostles. These numbers are significant in the teachings of Kabbalah, which stress things such as the 3 key anchors for the astral body, or the human soul, the head, the heart, and the belly area. The 7 anchors of the etheric body are mentioned, and the 12 anchors of the physical body. Those familiar with Hebrew or with the so-called Bible code know that the importance that words and numbers play in this, that they correspond together to form hidden ideas or meanings, a type of biblical numerology. Sacred geometry was used in the construction of Israel's first permanent temple, which is known as the Temple of Solomon. Kabbalah teaches that the design of the temple represented the metaphysical world and was an earthly representation of the tree of life through which the Creator reveals his truth. According to the Bible, King Solomon asked the neighboring king of Tyre, a man named Hiram, to help him build the temple by providing building materials and laborers. This story is recorded in the book of 1 Kings. Hiram had been a friend to Solomon's father, David, and so he gladly lent his help. But by the time the temple was completed, Solomon was so deeply in debt to King Hiram that he had to give to the king of Tyre 20 Israeli towns in northern Galilee. The building project was allegedly so large that Solomon ordered and utilized a forced labor of people. 30,000 men were sent to cut logs for the temple, 80,000 to cut stones out of the hill country, 70,000 men to carry the stones, and thousands more to work on crafting the stones into usable blocks. The book of 1 Kings speaks of another man named Hiram who was involved in the building of this temple. He was the son of a widow. He was a master craftsman. Hiram, the widow's son, was in charge of casting the bronze furnishings and ornate decorations for the temple. This man is referred to as Hiram Abiff or Hiram Abiff by Freemasons, and he's the central character in the Masonic rituals. In Masonry, Hiram is credited as being the chief architect of Solomon's temple, and his character plays the role in Masonic mystery teachings that was played by Osiris in the ancient Egyptian mystery schools. By the time that Solomon had finished building the temple, it was over 20 stories tall. The temple had two enormous pillars made of some kind of metal, copper, brass, or bronze. These pillars were named Boaz and Yakin. They had intricate carvings and ornamentation full of symbolism, such as hundreds of ivory pomegranates. Pomegranates, of course, are symbols of sacred geometry that go back to the time of Egypt. This fruit was used in Egyptian funerary ceremonies, and carved pomegranates have been found in the tombs of the Egyptian kings. There's plenty of other evidence that the ancient Temple of Solomon incorporated elements of the esoteric mysteries and sacred geometry that were taught by these ancient mystery schools. Later, Islamic tradition, specifically talking about Sufism, also incorporated these spiritual initiation teachings and numerology and sacred geometry. One example is the Sufi emphasis on the power of the number 19. This harkens back to ancient Egyptian temple science. One of the primary geometric grids used by the ancient Egyptians to lay out designs on their temple walls was based on 19 vertical divisions. The mystery schools taught that the number 19 is built into the energy blueprint in all human beings and that it exists through all creation. Well, this energy blueprint is connected not only to chakras, but to other energy centers. This is what the ancient Egyptian texts referred to as the golden light. So these various mystical traditions kept alive the ancient teachings of sacred geometry, including their architectural applications. In fact, the famous English classicist Robert Graves said that his studies indicated that it was from the 10th century Sufi builders who developed Cordoba in Moorish Spain that the medieval French craft guilds came into being. These craft guilds spread from France to England and most notably into Scotland. Because of the great significance that craft guilds played in the development of Freemasonry, let's take just a couple of moments here and discuss what a craft guild was. Medieval craft guilds were groups of people who worked together in the same craft or trade, who banded together for mutual benefit. They were somewhat similar to today's trade unions, but these guilds were a whole lot more than that, much more tightly knit. They often had their own meeting places called guild halls. Some of them even formed their own secret societies to protect their craft secrets. There are all kinds of craft guilds. One example were the metalworking guilds. And even within The general metalworking genre were specific guilds for knife makers, for locksmiths, chain forgers, nail makers, armorers. Another kind of guild, the one which we are most concerned with ourselves here, were the stonemasons. Each guild closely protected the secrets of their craft from people outside of the guild. A guild member who was found guilty of exposing secrets outside of his brotherhood to unauthorized or uninitiated people was subjected to either fines, banishment, sometimes even to death. The way the craft guilds passed on their secrets was through a system of hierarchies. In the case of craft masons, the most common hierarchy was the 3 stages of apprentice, fellow craftsman, and master mason. Once a new person entered the craft as an apprentice, he would spend years learning the trade by working with at least one or more initiated fellow craftsmen, who were also called companions. If the apprentice was to eventually be found worthy to receive higher knowledge of the craft, he would be put through an initiation ceremony, and greater secrets of the craft would be taught to him, for example, lessons on sacred geometry. The most disciplined and faithful could eventually go on to become master masons. So this system today is referred to as operative masonry because the men were actually carving blocks of stone with real tools and creating beautiful structures. But in time, the structure of this system would also be used in what is known as speculative masonry, what we today call Freemasonry. Freemasons also have the entry-level degrees of apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, and they also teach initiates how to use the tools of the trade, but rather than crafting beauty out of physical stones, Freemasons are said to use the tools of the craft to turn the rough stones of their souls into beautiful blocks to be used in the service of the great architect of the universe, who is God. I'll discuss the philosophy of speculative masonry in greater depth in a future video, but let's return to medieval France. There were 3 primary Masonic craft guilds at this time. One was called the Children of Father Soubise. They primarily used Romanesque style architecture. Next was the guild called the Children of Master Jacques. Master Jacques was an ancient figure whose father, a man named Jacques, had served his own apprenticeship in Greece, in Egypt, and also in Jerusalem. The tradition of this guild is that Jacques was the very man who had built the 2 pillars of the Temple of Solomon, with one of the pillars being named after him. But now we come to the most significant of these 3 medieval Mason craft guilds, the Children of Solomon. These are the ones who were deeply linked to the Knights Templar. If the legend is correct, the original Knights Templar who excavated the Temple Mount discovered ancient texts containing mysteries of sacred geometry, among other discoveries. The Knights Templar brought this knowledge back to France, where it was studied by the Cistercian monks under Bernard of Clairvaux. And it was these Cistercians who taught a new form of architecture based on sacred geometry to the Children of Solomon. Some actually speculate that the Children of Solomon were actually a division within the order of the Knights Templar rather than a standalone craft guild. What we do know is that in 1145 AD, the powerful Knights Templar issued an order that all of Europe accept the authority of the Children of Solomon. The historical document reads like this, quote, "We, the Knights of Christ and of the Temple, follow the destiny that prepares us to die for Christ. We have the wish to give this rule of living, of work, and of honor to the constructors of church, that Christianity can spread throughout the earth, not so that our name should be remembered, O Lord, but so that your name should live." This protective order meant that, like the Templars themselves, the members of this guild could travel unmolested, that they were not required to pay taxes to any king, and that they were immune from legal prosecution. So with these powers, the Masonic guild known as the Children of Solomon constructed a new world throughout Europe. Using this new form of architecture called Gothic, the children of Solomon built up magnificent churches and cathedrals. Perhaps in a future video I can devote more attention to the incredible symbolism and architectural majesty of some of these buildings. These were not simply places of worship, but they were also used for secular purposes. Things such as functioning as sanctuaries. They were temporary hospitals, public theaters, and so on. One of the more famous cathedrals built by the Templars' Children of Solomon Craft Guild is the Chartres Cathedral that is in France. The sublime architecture with its rich symbolism is a sermon unto itself. Over the centuries, thousands of pilgrims and visitors have reported being spiritually uplifted and even transformed by the power that the buildings inspired in their hearts. Regardless of the opinion that one may hold of Freemasonry, the Catholic Church, or religion in general, there simply is no denying that hundreds of esoteric messages were gracefully etched into these stones by master craftsmen, men who faithfully guarded the secrets of their craft that were based upon ancient mystic knowledge. One can easily see the liberal use of sacred geometry in the structure and building and design of these buildings. Nor can it be denied that the works of these Christians are strikingly similar to the works of their Muslim cousins. Sufism had long carried these same secrets over the centuries, handing them down from one generation to the next. So it's no surprise, therefore, that the mystery school teachings of the Sufis in Moorish Spain were very similar to the teachings of their neighbors in their Christian Gnostic neighbors, who had adopted much of the knowledge that they had from the Kabbalah and from Jewish mysticism. And because all of these various traditions came from the same ancient sources, they were bound to meld together. Those familiar with Freemasonry know that the order intermingles the esoteric teachings from not only Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but also from the ancient sources that informed the mystical traditions of those major religions. And here we must return once again to Rex Deus, those powerful families that claimed to have descended from Jerusalem before its destruction in 70 AD. While the Knights Templar and its notable craft mason guild were certainly products of the Rex Deus families, so too were the infamous sagas of the Holy Grail, stories of heretical origin that claim not only that members of Rex Deus were descendants of Jewish high priests, but also that some of them were direct blood descendants of Jesus himself through a marriage union with Mary Magdalene. So in our next episode, we will delve into the mysterious labyrinth of these highly controversial Grail sagas. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jacques Morphonios.